We're very self-sufficient in New Zealand. We're so far away from everywhere else that, we tend to just think, if it's a film that needs a lot of CG computer work, we can't go down the road to hire Sony or Digital Domain or ILM to do our shots. We're in New Zealand, and even back in those days where there wasn't the communication that there is today, it's like, well, this means that we're going to have to get a lot of computers and do them ourselves. So okay, so we sort of always have a very self-sufficient attitude where we are, that basically don't expect to be able to pull in rental equipment or anything else, buy the gear, maintain it, just own it and just get on with your filmmaking. So we've done that over the years. I wanted to do something fantastical, and I thought that would be so much fun to take that sort of Sinbad genre and combine it with computer effects, because Jurassic Park had come out. We'd seen the great dinosaurs had now been done, but to actually take fantastical monsters and a swashbuckling heroes and something like Sinbad and do a movie like that, I thought would be really neat. So I started to think about that being our next film after Frighteners, and needed to write a story, didn't have a story, and started to talk to Fran about it. And we kept referencing Lord of the Rings all the time. We just kept thinking, saying, well, it's got to be like Lord of the Rings, or it should be a bit, just like that bit in Lord of the Rings. Something like that's got to happen. And after a few days of doing this, we thought, well, why don't we find out about Lord of the Rings? We talk about it all the time, and it was just an absolute assumption that Lord of the Rings would be tied up, unavailable. Just assume that. I mean, it's such a big title. And but I thought it was worth a phone call. So eventually I called my agent and said, could he find out who has got the Lord of the Rings rights? I thought it was worthwhile calling Harvey Weinstein at Miramax and just seeing how interested he was in the Lord of the Rings. And he said he was interested. And then when he heard that Saul Zaentz had the rights, he said, well, that's going to be no problem. I can get those off Saul, because he was doing The English Patient with Saul Zaentz at the time. It was exactly when The English Patient was being shot, and he said, Saul, I bailed Saul out of The English Patient. I've done huge favours for him. He's going to return the favour. He's going to give me the Lord of the Rings rights. Harvey said that he couldn't spend more than 75 million per picture. That Disney, who owned him, had put a cap on the amount of money he could spend, and he was wanting to. For these films to be less than 75 million, and we tried, and then he found out that they weren't going to accept Part 1 and Part 2 as two different films that costing 75 million each. That they wanted this, they treated it as one film, and they didn't want to spend 150 million on these two films. They wanted just 75 million. So Harvey was stuck in a really bad place, and he came to us and said, "Listen, the only thing I can do is to basically make one movie, and you guys are going to have to support me here. I've supported you. You're going to have to now do the right thing, and you're going to have to cut the script down to one film, $75 million. And I said, is it like the first of three? Could we just do the first one? No, it's going to be the whole Lord of the Rings as one movie. $75 million, and it has to happen now. And I just said, I don't think I can do that, Harvey. I don't think I can do it. I don't think you can actually, collapse all this into one film, get rid of so much stuff that you couldn't even call it Lord of the Rings. I said, everybody who's read this book is going to be disappointed. There's no doubt about it. They will be let down. Everybody. You're taking debatably the most popular favourite book in the world, and you're making a film that is guaranteed to disappoint everybody who is familiar with the book. Well, not that many people have read the book, well, we won't worry about that. It was like relying on the fact that more people hadn't read the book than had, and wouldn't know the crimes that we committed cutting it down. So anyway, I just said, we were in New York in the office, the Miramax sweatbox, they call it, hot, nasty little room, windowless room in the middle of the Tribeca office that he's got. And we just said, we just wanted to go home, Fran and I. We were just sick of the whole thing, sick of Harvey and the shenanigans, and we just said, listen, we'll have a think about it on the flight home, Harvey, all right, and just give us, a day or two. We're flying home this afternoon. Let us go, and we'll just give it some thought and give you a call back. And then we flew home, having no intention of doing this film. We went through this process of sending the scripts to everybody in LA. everybody in Hollywood, some people in London. Only 2 people replied, which was New Line and New Line and Polygram. And Polygram were being sold at that stage, and they're an English company, and they said that they'd love to do Lord of the Rings, but they couldn't deal with it until the sales process. They were going to have a new buyer soon, new owner, and until that had all settled down. And we said, well, we've only got 4 weeks. Well, there was 3 weeks now. Harvey's only given us 3 weeks. We've got a ticking clock. So they immediately sort of dropped out, leaving us with only one option. I mean, everybody else passed just on the notion of it. We had a meeting with Bob Shea, and Bob basically at that meeting, you know, he looked at the scripts and the various bits of artwork and a videotape that we'd put together, and it was, and Bob's words were, well, you know, why would people want to pay? Why would you want to charge $9 to see this when you could charge $27? Was the words that he used, and I thought, what's he talking about? It was a little bit of a mental puzzle, and then I realised he was thinking about 3 movies. I said, you mean 3 movies? Yeah, Tolkien wrote 3 books. Well, shouldn't we do 3 movies? So they were immediately embracing. They saw the potential that if this was going to be as good as they hoped it would be, you'd want 3 of these movies, not 1. You'd want $27, not $9. And we had to basically rewrite the scripts again. We had to now write three movie scripts. So each of the scripts had to have a beginning, middle, and end, and be structured as a satisfying script. So had to tear everything apart and start all over again. Carry on developing, and then finally, you know, we got to that day, did casting, and got to the day of shoot. The day of shooting, which was the 11th of November, 1999. That first day of shoot was it was 3 years since I'd made that phone call, the first phone call asking about Lord of the Rings. It was 3 years to get us to that place. 3 years spent doing a lot of design work, a lot of conceptual work, location scouting. We were pretty well prepared. I mean, even though it was 3 movies being shot back to back, the 3 years of preparation was fantastic because we knew what we were doing, we knew how we were going to do it, and we were a very, very well-organised group of people. New Line were prepared to take the risk to fund the filming of all 3 because that's what was going to be so much cheaper for them. We build sets once, we just shoot the set, which sometimes some sets appeared in all 3 films, a few of them, some appeared in 2 films, and you're done. And you also have the actors on a deal so that they can't, you don't make one movie, because often what happens with franchises is you make one movie, the first one's very successful, and then the actors come back and they want twice the amount of money now because they're in a successful film. New Line, you know, had the actors contracted as one, they basically as one big job, and we knew it was 3 movies, but it was like they're getting paid for a job and they're getting paid at the rate that they were at that time. So, like, even though Orlando Bloom's career rocketed through the 3 Lord of the Rings films, he was still getting paid exactly the same on the 3rd one as he was on the 1st, even though he was getting a lot more money, you know, being offered to him for other films. And so, the economics of it, it's quicker. You get a momentum going; it'll be quicker to shoot. You don't have to wrap and have post-production and then start up a pre-production again, do that 3 times. You just sort of set up, go, and stop. And anyway, it was certainly much cheaper to do it that way. But the downside of it is a risk. The downside is if the first film fails, then you've squandered the money for the other 2. So that was, you know, that comes at its price. Casting the human beings, you know, who were actors, but casting them as humans was so important. Casting them as people that we got to know and feel whether they would survive in New Zealand for 18 months without being driven crazy, whether they'd be supportive of the film. And I think what happened is we got a really incredible group of people and who had great loyalty. And I think, because I thought about it afterwards, and I thought that really what the dynamic has done is now we've ended up with people that are really thinking, well, if I've committed to a movie I'm going to spend 18 months of my life on it, it's going to have to be pretty bloody good. I don't want to spend 18 months on a dud. And so everybody showed up on set every day with a spirit of, let's make this as good as it can be, because, oh man, this is a big piece of my life and I don't want to see this going to waste on a bad movie. I'd always wanted to make a fantasy film because I used to love those films when I was a kid. And I would, ones with monsters and ogres and trolls and sword fighting and big battles and castles. I mean, just that whole thing. That was one of the worlds that I loved the most, really. And so it just happened to end up being Lord of the Rings, the big granddaddy of them all. Ended up being our subject matter, but it was certainly it was a project that it was a genre that I'd wanted to do, but I'd always thought Lord of the Rings was a bit unattainable. I thought it was out of our reach, especially when you're down in New Zealand. You're not ever going to think you're going to get a chance to make Lord of the Rings. You don't even dream about it. You think you're going to write an original story, Lord of the Rings-ish type of fantasy story. That's what I assumed would happen. King Kong is in my view, one of the great pieces of escapist entertainment. It has everything that's wonderful about escapist cinema. It's got monsters, it's got intrigue, adventure, action, lost islands, dinosaurs, gorillas, and then at its heart, it's got a wonderful love story. It's a very romantic story about a gorilla who's had no empathy with any other creature, and his heart is lost to Anne Darrow, to this young woman, and it's a bittersweet, sad story, whilst being this wonderful adventure. I'm a huge fan of the first original film, but that didn't make me feel like, this film should never be remade. I don't think like that. I mean, there's nothing, the film is not in any danger. And in fact, the production of our film ultimately inspired Warner Brothers to finally do a lovely DVD restoration for King Kong. And it was, no coincidence that it was released just as our film was coming out. They released a wonderfully restored version of King Kong, which had never been out on DVD in the US before. So that was good. It was good that we caused that to happen. I just thought this is a wonderful story. The time is now here, both from the point of view of nobody sees King Kong anymore, and the fact that the technology has now got so potent and so powerful, the computing power that we have, that Kong can be done in a totally photorealistic way. And we set out to preserve as much about the original film as we could, in the sense of the 1933 setting and the Depression, which is a very important part of the story, and I didn't want to lose that. I wanted the Empire State Building with him being attacked by biplanes, so I wanted to set it in the 30s again for that reason. The actual aerial shots where we're flying around the Empire State Building, that all of Manhattan is built in the computer, one building at a time. In fact, we didn't even have enough time. There's 78,000 buildings there, and we didn't have enough time to have a person model each building. It just couldn't have done it. We didn't have enough. Too many buildings and not enough people. And so we developed a piece of software in the computer, and the computer constructed the city for us. We put in a bunch of architectural styles of different buildings, sandstones, brownstones, and apartment blocks and business places and banks, and we put a street map of New York in, and we labeled each street in the computer with the type of buildings it would have, the sort of ranges of heights that we would need. And we literally pressed the button, and the computer program went through and built the city for us. We'd written this piece of city building software because we couldn't, we didn't have enough manpower to do the whole thing. Kong is a wild animal. We wanted to not make him unduly cute, and he's a terrifying, frightening animal who is unpredictable, full of rage. And so that was really, the main priority for us was to establish him as a very frightening, scary creature. And then we were able to, starting at that point, we were able to then just peel away little moments of the facade at times and reveal a heart and a soul and something more caring underneath that. And I think that Anne Anne, who he had every intention of killing when he first takes her away into the jungle, she manages to survive on some sort of cunning and wit that she has, but she basically sparks his interest, and while he's curious about her, she'll stay alive. She realizes if she can just keep him curious and keep him wondering and keep him entertained to some degree, then he won't kill her. The tables really turn when you reach a point where Kong is now he's now fearful that Anne's going to be taken away or be hurt, and so he goes into a protective mode. And at that point, the power shift has happened. Because what's interesting is Kong has an immense power over Anne, but then the moment in the story where he now is going to do anything he can to protect her, is the power shifted to her, really, that Anne now has power over Kong. And that's ultimately his downfall, of course, because once he's in this super protective mode, that anybody tries to take her away, he's going to, come after them. That is going to lead to his demise. It sort of has to, really. I think what we've shown with Gollum and with Kong is that at the heart of any great performance is an actor, is a human actor. And we've tried to develop a pipeline that allows everything that's good and strong about that actor's performance to be preserved and translated and captured and kept and contained within our CG performance, not dissipated. And I think that's the lesson, really. I don't think any other companies are doing that, other than us. Say, other companies tend to just, animate their characters, but we try to have them driven by the spirit of a human being, and that spirit, I think, is important. I grew up in a little town in New Zealand at the bottom of the North Island called Pukerua Bay. Had about 800 people, but it was a very I look back on it as being very romantic, but it was. It's something like a Wuthering Heights, like Goonies type town, right on the edge of the coast. Thundering waves along the beach. There's stone caves inside the mountains. There's lots of hills, waterfalls, streams going down. Houses perched in amongst hills. Our house was on the edge of a cliff that sort of plummeted right down into the ocean, and it was a children's playground, an adventure playground. I was an only child, so I didn't have brothers and sisters. Spent a lot of time by myself reading books, imagining, and I used to imagine adventures taking place in the area that I was in. When I was about 8 or 9, some friends and I got into this routine where we would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, tap on our windows, because we lived down the street, tap on the window, we'd get out, we'd get dressed, we'd climb on our bikes, and we'd go biking up and down the hills and down to the beach and around at 3 o'clock in the morning, just a group of us, and then by 4 o'clock go back, get undressed, get back in our jammies and go back to sleep again. And parents had no idea that we were doing this. We'd have these sort of midnight adventures, and they were just like adventures out of Enid Blyton, a famous British author, wrote children's adventure stories, Famous Five, Secret Seven, and we were sort of heavily into that world. And that was how I grew up. I was beginning to get interested in film but that came through watching Thunderbirds on TV, a British TV show, Thunderbirds, when I was about 5. Our parents got TV when I was 5. I remember arriving in the lounge in a cardboard box, and Dad having to screw the wooden legs into the set. It's old black and white Philips set. And so from 5 I had TV, watched Thunderbirds, was really captivated by the fantasy elements, and that TV show has lots of models of spaceships and interesting sort of gimmicks and gadgets. It's a great TV show, very, very inventive and imaginative. And then the next thing that happened really is seeing King Kong, the original King Kong, when I was 9, and that film really accelerated a burgeoning interest in special effects models and films. And I could make models quite well. My parents got given a Super 8 movie camera by a friend down the road, just presented it to my parents for Christmas one year when I was about 9. This camera arrived at one Christmas, which was for us to do Super 8 home movies, except I grabbed the camera immediately because I thought, God, now I can get my spaceships that I've made of my models, and I can film them just like Thunderbirds. I got interested in stop-motion animation as a result of King Kong, Ray Harryhausen's films, 2 Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts. They are all stop-motion where you move the figure one frame at a time. And my camera didn't have a one-frame button. I could only just squeeze the trigger and squirt off 2 or 3 frames before I had to move the puppet, and then another 2 or 3 frames. So it was very, very jerky animation, since it was very imprecise. But anyway, it drove. This was all sort of fueling me. I wanted for a long time to be Ray Harryhausen's assistant when I grew up and help him do stop motion animation. And didn't think about directing films at this point in time. I just wanted to do special effects. I did like a World War II drama film with friends of mine in old army uniforms, kids with big helmets and uniforms that don't fit very well, running around, dug trenches in my parents' garden. My parents were really great, and it's actually something worth talking about on this, because I think unless you have the wholehearted support of your parents, I think any nutty kind of hobby or just passion that you have, you're going to get cold water thrown on it. You know, when I was having these nutty ideas about wanting to build, you know, trenches in our garden, help Dad build, get Dad to help me build machine guns and out of broomsticks, and I wanted to make movies and to make monsters and all this. And my parents, I think, who were very gentle, simple, conservative people, they would have probably preferred. They kept trying to prod me into an architecture career. But nonetheless, every single thing I did with film, they supported me. I ended up having to bake foam latex heads in these big plaster of Paris moulds in my mum's oven. So Mum couldn't cook the Sunday roast that Sunday. We all just had to have, you know, beans on toast or something, because the oven was commandeered by me, filling the house full of fumes, of course, toxic fumes, as the foam latex cures in the oven. I'm here because I'm a filmmaker and I want to make films, and that's been the way I felt almost since I was born. And I've never really thought about doing anything else. And so I had my parents supported me, and that support is really important. And I often think that how many people out there have failed to achieve in later life because they didn't get that support from their parents when they were young. I just wanted to get out of school as fast as I could, not because I hated school, although I didn't like it. I wanted to get out of school because I wanted to buy a 16mm camera. This was all about the equipment. It was all about the frustration of trying to make films but not having the best gear. So my parents had got me a Super 8 sound camera for a Christmas present during my teenage years, which I used. But we're now getting up to a point that they couldn't expect to buy me a 16mm camera for a Christmas present, and I needed a camera, which meant I needed to earn money. I just had to earn money. And so I just wanted to get out of school and into a job, any job, so that I could start saving up for the next piece of film equipment that I wanted. And I did leave school at 16. I got a job at a newspaper as a photolithographer. And during that 7 years I was there, I basically spent two of the years saving up for a 16mm camera, which cost several $1,000s. And I was only getting paid $75 a week. I lived at home with my parents all this time because I couldn't afford not to. So I stayed at home with Mum and Dad, who didn't charge me anything to stay at home, and was able to save this money. Got my 16mm camera eventually after a couple of years, and at that point I started working on a film, but that started out as a short movie. Because I wanted to try the camera out. It was a Bolex camera, 16mm spring wound camera, but quite complicated, more sophisticated than what I'd ever done. I had to set my own exposures with a light meter, and I had to learn how to do that because all the Super 8 cameras would just, you know, auto point and shoot things. So I suddenly had to figure things out, and I didn't want to waste any money at all, because I realized with 16mm that 3 minutes of film was basically $100. By the time you've bought the roll of negative, you then have to process the negative, and then you have to get a print made off the negative. By the time you'd gone through that, back in those days it was $100 to get this 3 minutes done. So this was serious now. I could only film on Sundays because I had a full-time job, and I had to work a 6th day overtime at the newspaper I was working at just so I could earn enough overtime paid, because now they pay these expenses of this film. So the short movie expanded and grew, and I thought it would be 10 minutes long, and film it over 2 or 3 weeks. And then what would happen is I'd sit all week in this boring job that I didn't particularly like, and my mind would just be thinking about the movie the whole time, and I'd come up with new ideas, the things I hadn't thought about for what we were going to shoot next Sunday. And so next Sunday would roll around, and I'd have a whole different bit of plot that I'd figured out that I wanted to do on that particular Sunday. And so the short film grew and grew and grew and expanded out over this period of time, and eventually we ended up shooting it for 4 years. Sundays for 4 years, and I had none of it cut. I got a very simple editing machine, 60mm editing machine, and I sat on my mum's kitchen table, and they couldn't eat dinner on the table anymore. They had to eat it on their laps. So for 2 weeks I just simply edited the film that we'd been shooting over the course of the last few years, and it came to a feature length. I mean, I knew I'd shot a lot, but I thought it might have been 45 minutes or an hour, but it came to something like 75 minutes, and we still had a little bit of filming to go. So at that point, after like 3 years of working on this film, I realized it was now a feature. I'd been completely thinking short film, and I thought, my God, I'm actually making a feature film. We got it done in 1988 for the Cannes Film Festival. It was called Bad Taste. And it sold really well. The irony is that it was the fastest selling New Zealand film ever. New Zealand had made quite sort of worthy films, socially aware, sort of, slightly arty, pretentious films to some degree. And I come along, and the Film Commission they have the job of selling all the New Zealand films at Cannes. And within the space of 48 hours, I think Bad Taste had sold to more than 30 countries had come in and bought it, and we were already at that stage way past the money. We were in profit. It was like we'd gone way past what we actually spent on the film, and it still gets sold now. The licenses always get renewed, and the film's sort of in constant circulation. This film, I have to say, was very gory. It was a splatter movie called Bad Taste, so it was not. It was actually something very unusual for a government film organisation to fund. I had a very good friend called Jim Booth, who was the head of he became a good friend. He was a sort of enemy at the beginning because he was the head of the Film Commission, but Jim supported it, and he later left to become a producing partner with me, so he became a good friend, and he was the right guy at the Film Commission to actually do this. It was just, he was a person prepared to take risks and not to just stick with the norm. I left the newspaper, left my full-time job after 7 years. I left at the moment that the Film Commission came in with money for me to finish it. Quit my job, and I've never been back there since. Always felt one day I might have to go back, but I guess now I'm probably can start to put those fears to rest. I still have recurring dreams that I'm back at the newspaper, though, that things haven't worked out well in the film business, and I'm back in the photolithography department. New Zealand didn't have a film school. New Zealand didn't have a film industry when I was starting out with my early films. I mean, I was wanting to make movies in a country that didn't make films, basically didn't make anything. So I think I must have been assuming when I was young that I'd have to travel overseas and I'd have to go to where Ray Harryhausen was if I was going to be his assistant or whatever. I certainly had a feeling that I wasn't able to stay in New Zealand. I tried to get a job in the film industry when I left school, but I couldn't get any job at all. It's not an industry. There's just a bunch of people that make movies. There was nothing, no position I could go into that. So I ended up at the newspaper, but anyway, by the time Bad Taste came out at Cannes, I was essentially a professional filmmaker at that point. I sort of ended up becoming a professional filmmaker because I got this film made in the weekends, and it got sold at Cannes, and it made money. So suddenly I was there. We started writing a zombie comedy film called Brain Dead, but we couldn't get the money for that. It was too expensive. So we had this other idea called Meet the Feebles, which was a cheaper idea based on puppets like the Muppets, but puppets who do sex and drugs, and they murder each other, and when they shoot each other, squibs fire off with blood spurts out of these puppets as they're getting hit, and it's like this very anarchic film, very funny actually. It is very funny. It's the one film I screened for the cast of King Kong last year when they came down to New Zealand. I got an old printout out off the shelf, and we sat down and watched the Feebles. They couldn't believe it. Sort of thought they should know who they're dealing with. That was three gory splatter movies pretty much in a row, And at that point I did feel like doing something a little different, and Fran, who had written both Feebles and Brain Dead with me, and we were now a writing team, Fran said to me, why don't we do something on the Parker Hume murder case? And I hadn't heard of the Parker Hume murder case, and she'd told me about this very famous murder case that happened in New Zealand, the South Island of New Zealand, Christchurch, in 1954, and it involved these two teenage girls that killed the mother of one of the girls. We wanted two unknown girls to play the two teenagers. They were 15, 16, and so we had Melanie Linsky, who's a New Zealand girl, to play the Pauline, the Kiwi girl. Fran just found her in a class in school. Fran got so desperate because the casting directors weren't showing us people that we liked, and so she got in a car and drove to schools and asked if she could go into classrooms. Said that she's casting for a film, and she would just stand in the classroom and ask a girl to stand up, and then she'd say, "Could you come with me?" And then she'd go and audition her. The English girl, Juliet, who was 17 years old, was played by a 17-year-old unknown actress in the UK who had never made a film, called Kate Winslet. And Kate Winslet's obviously gone on and made a lot more movies now, but this was her first film, and she was fantastic to work with, obviously. And so Kate and Mel were a really great combination. They bonded pretty well, and they got through the film, helped us through the film. John Hubbard, our London casting director, had very good instincts in her. I remember very clearly he said to us, "Kate Winslet's going to be a big star one day." That's what John says. He doesn't say that with hardly anybody, but he says Kate's going to be a big star one day. And that wasn't really for that reason, because she wasn't a star now for our film, but we liked her energy. She had a truthfulness which is really powerful. I mean, she's very strong on emotional stuff, because this was a very emotional, very angst-fraught with, despair, and she had to play all that stuff. And she just does emotion very, very well. She's very believable, and she taps into real things where she generates, her tears and her upset. It comes from a real place. Often actors pretend, and you can see they're pretending. And the best actors don't pretend. They actually channel some part of their selves which causes immense pain, and the pain is on their face, and the tears come out of their eyes, and they've gone there. They've gone to a dark place, whatever that is, and they are living the anguish and the pain, and they're giving that to you to film for your movie, and you get it. And that's what Kate does. Often the best writing is really with Fran and I just sitting on the floor, lying on the floor with a notepad and pen, and we just bouncing ideas back across between each other, and she's scribbling stuff down and I'm scribbling stuff down, and we're trying out lines of dialogue, we're figuring out sort of the way the scene might flow, and we're just making notes. And then after that I'd just gather her notes and my notes, which are almost indecipherable, and go up, and I'd sit down and I'd have a go at just typing the scene into the computer, so we can have a look at it actually in the cold light of day, have a look at it written out as a scene. Fran's very good at revising. I usually just let her sit down with the pages. There's always a time where she sits down by herself with the written pages and starts revising and starts changing, because that's where a lot of the skill of script writing is. It's not in actually getting the script written, it's the revising afterwards. It's the endless revisions. And Fran's strength is that she's fantastic at picking the weaknesses out of a script and just revising it till we're happy with it. We just had been on the grind for 10 years, basically. The grinding film machine, where you're laying the tracks in front of the train the whole time, and the things coming down behind you. And with Kong following the 3 Lord of the Rings films, it was 10 years of that, and we literally wanted to wake up in the morning for a while and not have anybody expecting something from us, not having a script that people are waiting for, not having a show up on the scoring stage, show up at Weta to talk about effects. It just wanted to have a period where our calendars wasn't packed with meetings and expectations of us to have to perform and do things. And so the only way we could avoid that was just to option the book ourselves with our own money, which we did. And so now nobody is telling us how quickly, how slow or fast we have to write the script, and we're really enjoying it. I think the danger with The Lovely Bones would be writing a script with a studio attached, and you end up with a completely different film than the studio was imagining, and then suddenly they're saying, well, but can't we change this and can't we change that? And we just really want to have the script in a state that's not going to happen immediately. It'll take several drafts, but get the script in a state that we're comfortable and we've arrived at the film that we want to make, and then go to different companies at that point with the script, and we'll simply go with the company that we think is supportive and responds to the script that they read.